to go.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Abby Ramsbottom, the Curator of Education at the South Dakota Art Museum. And thank you so much for joining us at Coffee with Collections, featuring selections from the Ben Reifel collection. We're so happy you're here this morning. And yes, it is quite cold, but hope you're enjoying coffee from your lovely homes. And just a note, this program is made possible through the generous support of donors like you. Because the South Dakota Art Museum receives operational funding from South Dakota State University, your donations, memberships, and gifts fund programs like this. Thank you. And just a note, if you have questions during the presentation, you can go ahead and enter those into the chat, or you can wait till the end and unmute yourself and ask Susan, Taylor, and I some questions. And I'm gonna pass it over to Taylor to introduce our guest today.
Thanks, Abby. I'm Taylor McKeown. I'm the Collections and Exhibitions Curator here at the museum. And we're thrilled to be joined by Susan Thompson, who's our co-host today for Coffee with Collections. Susan is a historian and activist who lives in the Flandreau-Coleman, South Dakota area. She has served on the board of directors for the South Dakota Peace and Justice Center and South Dakotans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. She's also served on our board of advisors since 2014 and is our collections committee chair. Thanks so much for joining us today, Susan.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Abby, for inviting me to share my research with you all.
Yeah, I think we'll start off with, can you tell us how you first became connected with the museum?
Well, my initial contact with the Art Museum was when I was a non-traditional student of history at SDSU. I signed up for an art history class with Norman Gamble, and that class was held here in the auditorium. So I would come early before class and just kind of hang out in the museum and stay after class to just also walk around the museum and view all of the exhibits. It was a quiet place. It was a really neat place to be, and I just spent a lot of time here. And then in 2006, I did an internship here under the leadership of Lisa Skolton and John Richterick. And then, like you said, in 2014, I was appointed to the advisory board. So
great. And so during that internship, what was your project?
My project, Lisa gave me a choice of 2 different projects, and when I heard Ben Reifel was one of them, I knew of him. I knew him as a politician because I have a strong interest in politics and actually took poli-sci classes in college as well as history classes. So I immediately, oh yeah, sure, I'll do the Ben Reifel one. So even though he was of a different political persuasion than I was, that still didn't stop me. I still wanted to do research on him. So, so Lisa came up with a 10-week excuse me. She came up with a 10-week plan, long-range plan for me to use as a guide for my internship. And one of the first things she wanted me to do was get familiar with NAGPRA, the NAGPRA Act of 1990, which is, for many of you that don't know, is a Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, and how the impact that had on the museums and the tribes. The next thing she wanted me to do was develop and research provenance records, and then she wanted me to do a personal history on Ben Reifel and do research on each one of his objects in his collection. So
okay. And so how did you go about researching?
Well, the biggest resource for me was the archives at the Briggs Library. They had all of his papers, and I went through boxes and boxes and boxes of original documents, congressional records, personal correspondence, newspaper articles, publications. South Dakota Magazine was one of them, and photos, thousands of photos. Yeah, so that was a great resource. The library here at the museum also had some research that was mainly for the objects in his collection. So,
okay.
But I did do more research for like the different symbols and things that were on the articles.
Okay, interesting. Well, maybe you could start us off today by telling us a little bit about Ben Reifel.
Okay, I have a short biography in chronological order that I will read here. In 1906, Benjamin Reifel, who was known as Lone Feather, was born in a log cabin in Cut Meat near Parmalee in the Rosebud Indian Reservation to William, known as Shorty, Reifel, and Lucy Lily Burning Breast. Reifel's father was German-American and his mother was Brule Sioux. From 1911 to 1922, Reifel attended a government day school, a county public school, a boarding school, and a small private school. In 1922, he completed the 7th and 8th grades in 1 year at the age of 16. In 1925, he entered the School of Agriculture that was known as the Aggie School here at South Dakota State College. In 1928, he graduated from the School of Agriculture. He finished that 4-year program in 3 years. In 1932, he received a Bachelor of Science degree from the South Dakota State College and was elected president of the Student Association his senior year. From 1932 to 1933, after graduation, he worked as a boys advisor at Hare's Episcopal School in Mission, South Dakota. In 1933, he married Alice Johnson on December 26th at Irwin, South Dakota. In 1934, he was assigned a field agent at the BIA headquarters in Pierre, South Dakota, to promote new programs under the Indian Reorganization Act signed by President Franklin Roosevelt. In 1935, his daughter Lois Nadine was born on September 8th in Watertown. And between 1942 and 46, Reifel served in the U.S. Army stateside and in Europe and achieved the rank of lieutenant colonel. In 1946, he served as superintendent of the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in North Dakota. In 1950, he received his master's degree from Harvard University. In 1952, he received a doctorate in public administration from Harvard. And after a brief period in the BIA office in Washington, D.C., he returned to Fort Berthold as the reservation superintendent. In 1954, he became the first American superintendent of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. In 1955, Reifel was the first Native American to be appointed as BIA Area Director of the Aberdeen Area Office in Aberdeen, South Dakota. And from 1961 to 1971, Reifel represented South Dakota's 1st district in the U.S. House of Representatives. He served on the Appropriations and Agricultural Committees. He helped secure funding to bring Earth Resources Observation System, known as AROS Data Center, to South Dakota. He worked hard to establish the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. In 1972, Alice died of pneumonia on February 8th, and then on August 14th, he married Frances Ryland Colby from DeSchmidt, South Dakota. In 1976, he served as interim commissioner of Indian Affairs in the last few months of the Ford administration. And from 1977, he became a trustee of the South Dakota Memorial Art Center. And from 1981 to 83, he served as president of that advisory board. In 1992, he died on January 2nd from cancer at the age of 83 in Sioux Falls. He is buried in Irwin, South Dakota. And in 1991, the Cedar Pass Visitor Center in the Badlands National Park was renamed the Ben Reifel Visitor Center.
And today we have 5 objects from the Ben Reifel collection at the South Dakota Art Museum. Could we maybe start off by talking a little bit about how this collection came to the museum?
Well, first off, a lot of these objects he got while he was a child. Some of them he purchased from trading posts like the Gildersleeve Trading Post and the Jordan Mercantile Company in the Rosebud Indian Reservation. Some he inherited from his mother, and others were presented to him as an award for his service with the BIA. And how they got here is an interesting story because he came to his first board meeting in 1977, and he was carrying an old beat-up suitcase, and Joe Stewart at the time was a director, and he came in with the suitcase and sat it down next to the conference table, and then Joe asked him, well, are you going somewhere, Ben? Where are you going? And then Ben proceeded to pick up his suitcase and put it on top of the table and open it, and then he started passing around all of his objects, headdresses, moccasins, pipes, tobacco bags and et cetera. And then he said, I've heard that the museum does not have a Native American collection. And if you're interested, I will loan mine to the museum. And I hope that this will attract others to loan theirs or donate their collections as well. So
it's pretty incredible because he really was the one to spearhead historical Native American objects coming to the collection during his time on the board. I think many other collections came.
yes,
came
yes.
to
And
us.
so how many collections do we have? Like,
I think it's 14 now.
okay,
14.
so over 1,000 objects,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So,
yeah. So maybe should we start looking at these 5 objects? We have one in front of us here, so we'll go back and forth between our camera and you'll get some close-up views of the objects that Susan's going to talk about, starting with this pair of gauntlet gloves.
this pair of gauntlets was presented to Congressman Reifel by the chairman of the Northern Cheyenne from the Tongue River Reservation during the Indian Awareness Congress at Missoula in 1968. They are crow and are dated circa 1960. They are made of smoked, brain-tanned deerskin and are lined with synthetic cloth. The cuffs have canvas panels embroidered with Czech and Italian seed beads. And the design may have been inspired by an illustration on seed packets. The flowers, I believe, are pansies, and each gauntlet is 37 centimeters long. So during the brain tanning process is when brain materials are worked into the hide, giving it softness and suppleness. And a seed bead is a generic term for any small glass bead. Seed beads are made by creating glass tubes or rods, and then they are cut to size. Czech seed beads, I don't think we can distinguish which ones are Czech or Italian, but seed beads are durable, reliably shaped, and extremely smooth. They are available in an array of shapes, sizes, and colors. Do you have anything to say about that?
The thing that I always think when I see this pair is how, and you talked about the durability of the materials, and you can see that these are well loved and worn gauntlets, right? But this beadwork is in incredible shape. And I think it's fun in comparison to other objects we'll look at today, that this is a little, later pieces in the collection.
Right.
Yeah, this piece in particular, it's just so visually stunning, and I think even on the screen you can see the way that the light reflects onto the beads. It's almost like it sparkles, and especially in comparison to the hide, which of course has some wear and some age to it, the beads still maintain this like really beautiful sheen. And you can even notice, and I don't have gloves on, so I don't want to put my hands too close, that there are, the brown beads on the outside are a little bit smaller with, in comparison to the beadwork of the flowers, and then the beads on the top part of the gloves, they seem to be a little bit larger. And did you explain what seed beads are?
Yes, yeah, yep.
Okay.
Do you want me to say it again?
Well, I had just said from your notes earlier that you had mentioned that it's just sort of a generic term for any small glass bead.
Yep.
Did you mention that? Okay.
Yes, yeah, and then they're created by glass tubes or rods, and then they're cut to size.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love this one.
Yes. It is.
Okay.
Well, it's kind of nice with this view, you can somewhat get a sense of scale. It's a little harder with the close object, but we're looking at a pipe stem and bowl next.
This pipe was a gift from the Lakota and the Pine Ridge Reservation. Its tribal affiliation is Oglala Lakota, and it is dated the 20th century. The ash stem is wrapped with natural and dyed red, black, yellow, and purple plated porcupine quills. It is decorated with golden eagle and bison head designs. Can you show this? And the mouthpiece is decorated with a traditional piece of skin and feathers from the neck of a mallard drake, which is a water bird that is identified with the power that is in thunder. It is also decorated with pink and white ribbon hangings. So plating quills is when you join 3 or more pieces of material by layering them over each other. Porcupine quill work was practiced before the arrival of Euro-American decoration. The quills were dyed with vegetable materials. The pipe is 50.5 centimeters long. The T-form pipestone or Catlinite bowl is square-sided. The tribal affiliation is Aglalo Lakota. The term Catlinite came into use after the American George Catlin visited quarries in Minnesota in 1835. Pipestone is a type of mudstone or clay, usually brownish red in color, which occurs in a matrix of Sioux quartzite. It is used for making prayer and ceremonial pipes. The bowl is also dated early 20th century and it measures 11.5 centimeters. This pipe has been used to smoke the sacred red willow bark tobacco, which is chisasa, and is therefore considered a consecrated object. The sacred pipe serves as a portable altar for the Lakota religion. Each part of the pipe has symbolic meaning. The pipestone, the ash stem, and the tobacco represent the earth, sun, and people. As the smoke diffuses, these elements are brought into harmony. Through prayer, the individual is connected with the Great Spirit, Wakantanga. Red willows are regarded by Native Americans as being relatives of the 4 winds, as the seeds are carried widely by the wind in 4 directions. A secondary relation is to the water, as they are often found growing by streams. The bark works well in incense and is an important ingredient in sacred smoking ceremonies. It is calming and soothing, making it an ideal herb for use during sessions of meditation. Do you have anything?
Just so much wonderful history in one object, and hearing all of that cultural significance that you learned about in your research, it's moving to me that Ben Reifel parted with these treasures because he thought it was so important that they be preserved here. So I guess that's the thing I thought about.
But the culture is for Native Americans is to give their things away. So I think he knew they were going to be taken care of well here and wanted to share them with other people. And when you, like you have it displayed right now in the red velvet, that for a sacred object like this, it's supposed to be, also sage can be laid, next to it. But it should always be presented on a piece of red felt.
So,
fabric.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So is the plating technique in the quill work, is that what gives it the sort of braided look?
Yes,
Okay.
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah, and we can show that again. Yeah.
And you had said that the quill, the colors of the quills that have been dyed through vegetables.
Yes.
Do you know which vegetables?
No,
or?
I
Okay.
do not. Sorry.
I do think, the quill work on this piece ties in really nicely to, I believe, the next piece we're talking about, the bladder case.
Okay.
Because that was a case used to house quills before they were used in designs like you see on this pipe stem. Should we move on to the other one? Much smaller object here.
This bladder case belonged to Reifel's mother, Lucy Lily Burning Breast. The tribal affiliation is Brule Sioux, and it is dated early 20th century. It is either a cow or a bison bladder, and the symbol design represents stripes or trails. Cases of this type were shaped like a Euro-American man's coin purse, and were commonly used by Plains Indian women to hold the porcupine quills used in the embroidery. The quills would have been softened by saliva and flattened between the teeth before use in embroidery. And Taylor, you said that there are still quills inside of it.
Yeah, I wish I could show you all, but this is such an incredibly fragile object. But you can see here, this is the opening to the case. And you might be able to slightly see it's kind of dyed red in here because there are still quills, red and blue quills within the case.
This object was recovered from a suspicious house fire that Reifel's mother perished in. The cause of the fire was never investigated, but it was suspected that Lucy was murdered and the fire was arson. Lucy was known to be the town banker. It was suspected that a young man had wanted to borrow some money. Lucy always kept the screen door locked, and they found kerosene poured around the outside window. Lucy's body was found at the opposite end of the house. The neighbors at the time were not at home, and Ben was in Peru at the time as well.
I don't know if we discussed his background. His father was German American. Can you talk a little bit more about his parents?
Sure. His father was German American. His paternal great-grandparents, Reifel's paternal great-grandparents, immigrated from the Rhineland in Germany to Peppertown, Indiana. Ben Reifel came out to Rosebud Indian Reservation to visit his brother John, who was one of the first civil servants to teach in federal schools. And so that's when he met Lucy, his wife. At the time, it was shortly after the Dawes Act of 1877, where Indians were allotted parcels of land on the reservation. So she was allotted either 160 acres or 80 acres, and then he built a log cabin on her property, and they farmed. So Ben Reifel grew up in two different cultures. So the farming, he learned farming from his father, and then he learned the traditional Tayospe, traditional Indian culture from his mother. And his grandmother, extended family, his grandmother and his maternal grandmother lived with them.
So there's another object that was Ben's mother's, correct?
Yes.
Can I pull that one next?
Maybe we'll just stay briefly on the view of us, because this is a larger object, so it will be harder to show with the other camera, but this is kind of the scale of it. So we'll show that in detail.
So this tobacco bag also belonged to Lucy, Reifel's mother. It is Brûlé Sioux and is dated circa 1920. It is constructed of brain tanned deer skin and is decorated with porcupine quill work, Czech and Italian glass seed beads, French faceted glass seed beads, and a fringe of domestic cowhide parfleche. It measures 75.5 centimeters long by 20.5 centimeters wide. Its purpose is to store the individual's pipe bowl, stem, and tobacco used on ceremonial occasions and for prayer. The symbol, you show the symbol, is a teepee, and it's surrounded by like a step pattern, and then it shows an attaching arrow point. This object was also recovered from the house fire that killed Lucy Reifel. So faceted beads, and I don't know if we can tell, are painted on the inside. Oh, they're the gold ones. Yes, they are.
We've talked a lot about the designs and learning what they represent. Where did you do that research? Was that written text? Did you?
There's in your library here at the museum, there are several books. I forgot what the name of the book that I used, but I drew most of the designs and symbols out of that material. And it's also recorded. I mean, Joe Stewart had hired this Michael Cowdery from California to help catalog and document his, along with Reifel, these objects. So there was, you know, information, and
Sure.
that was already documented that I pulled from.
No, I think about, you said it was circa 1920, so I think about this object that has been living for 100 years, and it's found its home here for the past 40 years. Before that, you know, I think about the importance of what we have to do now, which is to preserve it and to care for it in the way that it should be. Yeah, and I'm just glad that we're able to take a closer look with you all today.
I should give a shout out to many guild members who are on Coffee with the Collections today that took these objects from being housed in a suitcase when Ben Reifel brought them in, and they're beautifully housed now. We have a great volunteer guild. It's all of this wonderful housing, so thank you to them. And we have one more object to share with you all today. And then we should have a little time for questions after.
This probably is one of my favorite objects from his collection. This medicine rattle belonged to He Dog, who was a friend of Crazy Horse. He Dog fought alongside Crazy Horse during the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. And he was one of the last traditionally elected leaders of the Oglala. The tribal affiliation of the rattle is Oglala Teton Sioux, and it is dated 19th century. It measures 23 centimeters long. It is constructed of deerskin parfleche that is cut into two roughly circular pieces. You can see the seam on the side. Each with a strip for attachment of the handle and sewn together with animal sinew. Tiny crystal pebbles gathered from anthills are placed inside the rattle. Oh yeah. It is decorated with a golden eagle fluff and red ribbon. The mirrored image is the back-to-back K-shape or hourglass design. This object is a repository of such power for the initiative that it transcends notions of aesthetics. So it's not a particular beautiful piece, but it's a very important historical piece. It was presented to Ben Reifel on the occasion of the 100th birthday of He Dog in 1933. Medicine rattles were used specifically to accompany singing during Longtime, which is a naming or adoption ceremony, and Uwipi, or the spirit calling ceremony. Uwipi translates to "they tie them up," because the medicine man who performs the ceremony is actually tied up with a special blanket while acting as a medium between this world and the spirit world. It is through Longtime that a kinship relationship between all involved family members is created. It is at this ceremony that Lakota names are given. Deerskin is used from the black-tailed deer as one of the strongest sources of supernatural power. Sinew is a piece of tough, fibrous tissue uniting muscle to bone or bone to bone, a tendon or ligament that is used as sewing thread. Parfleches were decorated rawhide containers used by the nomadic Plains Indians for transportation of food, clothing, tools, valuables, and other materials. The rawhide, typically from bison, was soaked in crude wood ash lye to remove the hair. It was then cut, folded, and painted in bold geometric or abstract designs. After the establishment of reservations, parfleches were no longer needed. Therefore, they were recycled and made into other objects.
Well, I'm looking and I see that we're already at 10 and there's a couple comments in the chat. Carolyn, could you let us know if there were questions from the audience or comments?
So far, no questions, but Donis Dropro commented about the vegetable and berry dyes that were used to dye quills.
Thank you.
But yes, if anyone has questions, you can put them into the chat or you can unmute yourself.
What kind of
Oh, sorry.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Lauren.
Yeah. What kind of bone is that in the rattle?
I'm not positive, Lawrence. That's a great
It
question.
is, and there was nothing in my research that talked about that,
Yeah, I'm not positive. That's a great question, Lawrence.
especially at the end of it.
Mhm.
You see the end of it.
Mhm.
One would think that it had, would have some particular significance since it is a spiritual rattle.
Right.
What kind of bone, and it would place whatever it came from in connection with the spirit world or something like that. I'm not sure, but it'll be interesting to find out, especially if you have other objects where bone is used. I would be interested in knowing the significance of that.
I think you raise a great point with your question, Lawrence, in that, I mean, Susan did so much great research on all of these objects, and this has been in the collection or at the museum for 40 years.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about museum collections is we never know it all, and we can always keep learning about these objects. So that's a new thing to investigate. So thank you, Lawrence.
Let's see,
And-
we
and-
have,
Go ahead, Karen.
yeah, there's a question from Richard. Will this show be archived for others to view? And I can answer that. Yes, it will be instantly available on Facebook, and I'll be posting it to our YouTube channel later this week.
And I think this is our 4th Coffee with Collections we've done. So there's other programs on our YouTube channel too, if you want to check those out as well.
Yep.
I also thought when Susan was talking about parfleche, there is a great parfleche box. I think it's late 19th century that's on display in the museum right now in an exhibition, the Beacle and Thorburn collections that just opened. So if you'd like to see an example of parfleche, come and see that. It's on display.
Another
Okay.
question about the beads. So those are seed beads. Can you talk about any other kind of beads that were used, and what kind of materials were beads made from pre-European times?
I'm not a bead expert, to be honest, Lawrence. I don't want to go into territory that I can't speak to. But again, there's a wonderful dress on display with a breastplate that has multiple different kinds of beads on it in the museum right now, and it's a great example. But yeah, I'm not an expert on that, so.
Jeannie was wondering if we might be able to put in writing or in some kind of a brochure or document form all the great information that you've shared, Susan. So we'll have to investigate that.
Let's talk about that.
Sure.
And
Well,
then,
and we didn't, oh, sorry, Carolyn, go
oh, well, I
ahead.
was going to say, Jake suggested reaching out to the veterinary anatomy department to identify the
Oh.
bones in that rattle.
Yeah, great
And
idea.
he was saying it might be a leg bone from an eagle.
Yeah.
Just looking at it here. So.
Yeah, interesting.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, good idea.
I'm also sorry about irritating, but I'm also interested in tools. You mentioned needles, and I'm just curious. You mentioned that some of them were made from bone. Were there any other materials, or can you tell us a little bit more about the use of bone for needles? That would seem to be a very interesting technology, and especially utilized in making things like puncturing leather and stuff like that. They would have to be reasonably sturdy to do that. Or you make the hole first, that's another thing. But even then, that's a thing. So can you talk about any other things that the needles were made of, or was that it?
The primary ones I've seen in our collections and that we've loaned over the years have been bone, and you know, they are incredibly strong and incredibly sharp. So I think that was primarily what was used, Lawrence, to my knowledge.
And I see a question from Cheryl saying that an eagle claw was mentioned with the rattle. Could that be pointed out? I think what was mentioned was the golden eagle feather, which is atop the rattle.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
for pulling that up.
One other thing I kind of wanted to bring up, you talked about Ben Reiffel's relationship to the National Endowment for the Arts and to BIA. Could you talk about how he was pivotal in bringing a collection of Oscar Howe paintings to the museum collection as well?
Yes, when Ben Reifel was the director of the BIA area office in Aberdeen, he authorized the purchase of 8 Oscar Howe paintings. At that time, Oscar Howe was a little known artist who was an art teacher at Pierre High School. Of course, the BIA purchased 8 paintings. 2 of them were put, I think, in the director's home, in Ben Reifel's home at the time. And later on, after he retired from the BIA, he noticed that the BIA was not taking care of these paintings properly, and he was disturbed by that. So he asked that they transfer them to the art museum. And so they transferred. There were 2 that are thought that Ben Reifel took himself from his home, and he put these 2 in his trunk. The other 6 were transferred from the BIA office, but these 2 were he put in his back of his trunk, and he was going to bring them to the art museum himself. But he kind of forgot about them, and so he was driving around for I don't know how long, weeks maybe, before he remembered, oh my goodness, I have 2 paintings, Oscar Howe paintings in my trunk. So then he transferred those 2 himself to the art museum, and those 2, we do not know which 2 out of the 8 that he himself transferred. So yeah, so we have 8 paintings that were Oscar Howe paintings earlier on in his career.
Yeah, and that's a large part. I think we have 27 works by Howe, so in large part, we're very grateful to Ben Reifel for bringing those here too.
Yes.
Any other questions? Donna says Mike Marshall from Rosebud does a lot of work with Powerfletch and does a lot of games that we used to play. Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess we're kind of past our time, but I did have a question for Susan. You know, when we were looking at objects and planning this program, Susan mentioned, well, I'm a historian and my background is in history. So I wonder if do you make a distinction between the work that you've done with artwork as a historian versus an art historian? Like, what sort of questions do you ask that you think might be different than what something Taylor might be researching for artwork?
But when I look at a piece of art, I want to know the contextual information, what the context of that piece, like what was the artist, what was the history of the artist, why did the artist design it, why did the artist make that piece of art, and like in particular with this piece right here, the rattle, I'm just fascinated by the historical background of it because of He Dog knowing Crazy Horse. I mean, that to me is just fascinating, and more so than the piece, the beauty of the piece, which is, you know, like I said. But the museum also acquired, just recently acquired a piece from Karen's exhibit, and it was by Michael Tubuls, right, and Keith Freifart. And on that piece, it's upstairs in the gallery right now. It's huge, but there's a reference on that painting or of the Badlands, a bombing range that was in the Badlands during World War II, where the U.S. military used the Badlands as a bombing practice site for during World War II. So those type of things I kind of pick out of artwork. I mean, I still appreciate other artwork by just looking at it and appreciating the beauty of it. I always want to know kind of how it came to be.
Yeah.
Can you, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, Lawrence.
Can you talk a little bit about how art helps us to understand the peoples who created it and the connection it has to ourselves today?
Well, when I was doing this project, I learned so much about Lakota culture. You know, it was a learning experience, and I carry it with me, I guess. I don't know what else to say, Lawrence, but guys, I think that.
Well, I was just thinking your answer before and kind of related that we all come to art with our own entryways. You know, you enter it through history. Right. Some people enter it through design.
Exactly.
And that's the power of art. I think it can connect people in so many different ways.
Yeah, and for me, art is everyone's intent or approach to making sense of the world. So, you know, it's in the sciences too. I think artists and scientists end up asking a lot of the same questions. They just go about answering them in different ways. So, and I agree with Susan and Taylor that it's just when you look at art objects, you sometimes can learn more about the world around you than you can from just text on a page. Mm-hmm. And there's another question in the chat.
Donna says, Taylor, can you please share a little about the new exhibits that are on display now or opening soon?
Sure. We essentially have, by February 11th, we'll have all new exhibitions up. In December, a selection from the permanent collection of figurative works opened, which includes works by Harvey Dunn and Oscar Howe. That's up through April. We just opened a show of Guild acquisitions, so pieces, a diverse range of pieces that the Guild helped us acquire over the last 40 years. There's a Paul Goebel exhibition of his images or illustrations of birds. The Beekle Thorburn collections are on display. Eugene Beekle was a Jesuit priest and photographer, so his photographs are on display, paired with historical Native American objects from the Thorburn collection. And we are in the process of installing the South Dakota Governor's 10th biennial exhibition. So that includes, I think, 70 artists that are living and working in the state right now, works created in the last 3 years. So that opens February 11th, and the reception is February 16th. So we hope to see you all join us for that.
And a plug for our next Coffee with the Collections, that's going to be, and I'm looking at my calendar, that's going to be on March 7th, same time, 9:30 a.m. on Zoom, and we're doing a Curator's Cut. So we're going to be talking about how Taylor and the staff make decisions to what to include in exhibitions. And for that one, we're going to focus in particular on our figure show, Pose Repose.